This week's tip is a little different, as I'm actually working with a garment that's in progress, and what I'd like to talk about is how to evenly space buttonholes. Now, I am not a math whiz. In fact, I am a math idiot, and I rarely use formulas for this sort of thing, because for a buttonhole to look good, you need to take, and to be properly spaced, you need to take into consideration the type of buttonhole, the type of band, and then you can place them. And formulas often don't allow for modification of stitch pattern. Now, this is a cardigan, and I've worked the button band, and I've decided I'm going to have 7 button holes placed on the opposite band. But the first step is I completely work the button band because I want to have a placement guide. Now, generally speaking, what I do is I first decide where I want my top and my bottom buttonhole. And here is my first buttonhole, and well, it's going to be on this side when the buttonhole band is worked. And I've decided that where I want it to be placed, I'm going to be using an eyelet buttonhole, and eyelet buttonholes work best if they are worked over a purl. So I have this marker where my purl is going to be. Now, it may look like this buttonhole is up a little bit, but when I place the button on it, this is exactly where I want it to be. It's where I've determined I want it to be. Now, the next step is to place the marker at the top, and I have it here. Again, I've determined that it's going to be worked over a purl stitch. And here's how my button is going to look when it's placed. Now, what you can do at this point is, let me stand back a little bit, is I can measure the distance between my first buttonhole and my top buttonhole and divide it by the number of buttons that I plan to put in between. This will have 7 buttonholes. So I'm going to have one here, and one here, and then evenly space the 5 buttons between those 2 spots. And I can get a measurement, and that's going to give me an approximate distance. I tend not to use measurements as much as I count stitches. And in K1 P1 ribbing, if we look at this closely, I have columns of knit stitches, let's look at it from this direction, that I can count. And so what I did is I counted the total number of rows or stitches between the top marker and the bottom marker and the top marker, and then I divided this by 5, and it gave me an approximate number of stitches to have between each buttonhole. And it works out to about 30. And so I meticulously counted, and I placed my markers there. And when I have my buttonholes, my buttons placed on here, I'm going to be happy. Oh, it looks like I thought I had 7 buttons, but I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, there you go. Got to go back and change the pattern. I figured this out. Now, the next step is to work the buttonhole band, and I'm going to make sure that I have exactly the same number of stitches in this band, and then it's going to be very easy to place these as I go along. Now, that's going to be evenly spacing them this way. I also need to evenly space them from side to side. How many rows do I want before I work my buttonhole? Now, I have been lucky enough to have on the back of the shell some buttonholes, and how I determined how many rows to work is I used my gauge swatch, which I put in a safe spot and now I can't find, and I worked a buttonhole on the side, and my band is 10 rows wide, or long rather. And I've worked out that if I work the buttonhole on the 5th row, that it's going to be evenly spaced. And you can see that the buttonhole is pretty evenly spaced, and it accommodates, trying to do this one-handed. It accommodates my button. So I'll go into more detail on this in the actual blog.